ברוכים הבאים לפודקאסט פיגסקין כשר, הפודקאסט היחיד מסוגו בישראל שמדבר על פוטבול אמריקאי. גם בתקופת האוף סיזן אנחנו איתכם, עם תוכן מרתק על הדרפט וכל מה שקשור אליו, הפרי אייג'נסי, פנטזי פוטבול ועוד הרבה מאוד תוכן. בכל פרק נביא אורחים מרתקים מכל קצוות עולם הפוטבול, גם מישראל וגם, שמעתם נכון, ישר מה-NFL. הצטרפו אלינו למסע בעולם הפוטבול גם כשהמגרשים ריקים. ברוכים הבאים לעוד פרק של פיגסקין כשר. אנחנו פה היום עם הפרק הראשון של העונה שלנו, פרק פנטזי, ולא סתם פרק, אנחנו הבאנו אורח מיוחד, ריאן Heath, שבא אלינו מפנטזי פוינטס. הוא נמצא שם כמה שנים, והוא פה איתנו היום כדי לדבר איתנו קצת אנליטיקות של פנטזי, קצת שיטות, איזה שיטות הוא אוהב. הפרק כמובן יהיה באנגלית, כי ריאן אין לו מושג בעברית.
ואם אנחנו קצת שרודים זה בגלל שקמנו מאוד מוקדם בבוקר, כדי להתאים את עצמנו ללוז שלו, אז תסלחו לנו מראש.
אבל כן, בדיוק, לא משנה איזה שעה אתם צופים בזה, קחו איזה שתייה, בירה, קפה, מה שאתם אוהבים, תשבו ותהנו מהפרק, כי זה הולך להיות פרק שהולך לתת לכם הרבה מידע על פנטזי, הרבה מידע עוזר, כדי שתוכלו לכסח את החברים שלכם בפנטזי, אז תהיו מוכנים, ואנחנו ישר ניכנס לעניינים. Okay, so Ryan, how's it going, my man?
Hey, it's going very well, guys. Excited to talk to you guys on this night for me, morning for you. Should be a lot of fun.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, so first of all, welcome to our podcast. Welcome to Kosher Pigskin. I'll just translate what I said in Hebrew. Basically, we're doing our first episode this season on fantasy football. We talk both regular football, American football, NFL, and fantasy. We do some fantasy episodes as well. We're the only podcast in Israel that talks fantasy. So this is our first episode, and we're recording this at 6 a.m. for us. For you, it's around 11 p.m. So we're drinking coffee, you're drinking some alcohol, beer or something. Whatever time it is for you, whenever you're listening to this, take out your drinks, enjoy the episode, because we're going to give you guys a lot of good information to help you crush your leagues, crush your teammates, your league mates, and sit back and enjoy. So Ryan, let's start off with a little bit of a background. What's the give us a little bit of a background how you got to fantasy points. What is fantasy points? Who is Ryan Heath? How did you get into fantasy? What caused you to join fantasy points? And also, just if you have a team that you enjoy, I'm guessing your team is the team that represents you behind you. Yeah, give us some information.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm a Patriots fan. I've kind of been in hiding the last couple of years. Hasn't been as much fun as it has been for most of my life. But yeah, still I am a Patriots fan. As far as how I got into fantasy football broadly, I've been playing it since I was like 12 or 13 years old, starting with like family leagues, up into playing with friends like through high school. And I just kind of became obsessed with it as I got older and older. And now I spend an inordinate amount of time just researching, writing, talking about fantasy football. It's kind of taken over my life. So it's my absolute favorite thing. So always down to talk fantasy. As far as fantasy points, basically, in my opinion, it is the best website on the internet for fantasy football analysis. So we cover everything from dynasty formats to best ball to daily fantasy to betting. Some of the most respected names in the fantasy industry: Scott Barrett, Graham Barfield, who just brought back his very popular series Yards Created this year. I kind of caught on here a little bit over a year ago. Scott Barrett had read a few of my articles. I used to post on like a personal blog. I was working for a couple smaller sites, just writing, podcasting for years, especially through college. And yeah, now I'm here today writing for Fantasy Points. Mostly what I've been doing this off season is kind of deep diving into our data product called the Fantasy Points Data Suite. It basically has everything you could possibly want to know in terms of data for football. We hand chart a ton of stats, really cool stuff that it's hard to find other places. So like catchable targets, first read target share, lots of really cool stats that you can only get by having a team of people charting every single play of every single game like we do. And my job is I get it all laid out for me nice and neatly in the data suite. And I get to write all these research articles about all of these cool stats. So it's a ton of fun. I really enjoy it. You can access the Fantasy Points data suite at data.fantasypoints.com and go check it out.
All right, awesome, my man. I can tell you that Oran and both I were very big and we were very into analytics, and we enjoy it very much so, especially when it comes to fantasy.
Yeah.
Just one quick question: is that picture behind you, is that autographed by Edelman?
It is. So yes, it is autographed by Julian Edelman. It's the catch he made during the Super Bowl comeback against the Falcons, the 28-3 game. If I remember correctly, that I believe was the drive that tied the game, and the catch like kept it alive.
Yeah. So, I was asking because I have the same exact picture autographed. So
oh no way, that's awesome.
You have I don't know if you're aware of this, but you have an owner who's a crazy supporter for Israel. And Julian Edelman came with Robert Kraft, came to Israel a couple of years ago, and I had the opportunity to meet him, hang out with him a little bit, and he signed that picture for me. So
that is super cool. Wow.
Yeah, good guy. So Oran, how's it going, my man?
Yeah, it's all good. Ryan, great to have you with us. So obviously, I'm following you, and I'm following Fantasy Points for a while. And we also have, based on like the promotion for this podcast, more followers in our community of our Fantasy Points. And we're really excited to have you here. There are two articles that caught my eye that I'd like to discuss, to give us our followers a sort of edge towards the next fantasy season. Let's start with the age curve article that you have. I think it's actually your pinned article, right? Pinned post on X.
Yep. Yeah, that is my pinned tweet on X. It has been for a while. Probably will be for a long time. I'm gonna have and every day I'm trying to top the reception that article got.
Yeah, because it's amazing. And actually, for those who follow you or don't follow you, there's an interesting retweet you did, and I'm still calling it tweets, just like you do. I refuse to call it posts. Of the production that Devon Adams had since his career began. And when you put that graph right in front of the age curve that you created, it looks basically identical. And I recommend everyone to go check it out. So can you explain about the age curves, about the different positions, and what people can take from that towards the next draft?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I would say the most important position that this applies to is actually running backs. Mm-hmm. So in fantasy, it is all about predicting breakouts, right? We want to draft players who are going to outperform their ADP where they're being drafted. And the best way to do that is to draft a player who is going to unexpectedly break out this year. So for running backs, as it turns out, that almost always occurs in the first 3 seasons of their career. So, and really, especially rookies and year 2 running backs. So those players just generally in fantasy football have the most upside. I try to target them as much as I possibly can, wherever it makes sense. Just to throw some names out in terms of guys going outside of like the first round or 2, most likely. Devon Achane, I'm going to have a lot of this year. Tajay Spears, I really like kind of going in the mid rounds. Kendre Miller is kind of a sneakier running back behind Alvin Kamara, who is getting older, is aging. And that's a good segue into the other end of the running back age curve, which is after around year 6, their production tends to start to fall off. And an important point is with any age curves is if you pull up my article or if you see something I've tweeted and it looks like a position will gradually fall off in their production as they get older, that's not rarely how it works out in practice for an individual player. Usually a player goes from being about as good as they always have been through their career to very suddenly just falling off completely. And we know that that risk is there for running backs really starting in year 6, year 7, year 8. Kamara specifically is right in that range right now.
Right, running backs. You know, you guys need to be really careful when it comes to running backs. It's also, besides the fact that it's like the committees are just everywhere right now in the league. There are very, very few running backs who are safe in their positions as RB1s. It's just a very, very it's a position where just it happens within 1 year, and it's for me, let's say for example CMC. I'm not touching CMC. It's just it's very worrying to me, just the fact that he's had his injuries in the past. I understand people that take CMC 100%. I mean, he's 101 this year, and he justifies that. But for me, it's risky.
Yeah, I mean, I will take Christian McCaffrey this year. I'm all about Christian McCaffrey this year.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, my kind of my strategy as far as running backs, especially early, I will draft a running back early in fantasy football if I think he can have a Christian McCaffrey level season. And that's the only time I will do it. There are a handful of running backs I think can do that this year. Christian McCaffrey obviously is the best bet.
Right. So for me, it's Bijan. I'm all over Bijan. I think Bijan can definitely have a 101 year. And also he's young, second year. According to the age curve, that's it's not a bad age.
So the age curve article also touches on wide receiver and tight end, if I remember correctly. So can you elaborate a little bit about that? Even though you mentioned it's most suitable for running backs.
Yeah, no,
but there's like a different progression that you try to describe of the career, at least fantasy-wise.
Definitely, yeah. So there are important takeaways at the wide receiver and tight end positions as well. For wide receivers, in terms of when they break out, it used to be year 3 being the most common. As both the NFL has become a more pass-heavy league, and also as we've gotten a lot of really talented wide receiver rookie classes entering the league.
Sam Laporta crafted basically.
Oh yeah. No, but as we've gotten more pass catching talent generally, the breakout age has shifted earlier and earlier at both wide receiver and tight end, but especially at wide receiver. So yes, a lot of wide receivers will just immediately break out in year 1 now. Year 2 wide receivers are still generally good upside targets. And in terms of when they fall off, it will be pushed off a bit compared to running backs. It's usually more like year 9, year 10, year 11 is when you need to start to worry. And as you guys mentioned a little earlier, Devontae Adams, I think, is kind of the clearest guy that I'd be concerned about with that this year, who that is likely to be drafted early.
Yeah, I actually published the top 200 ranking, and once I saw that graph, I thought to myself, man, I really gotta check it again, maybe modify it a little bit in relation to Devontae. So another article you recently published is about weighted opportunities, which I think is really interesting, and it tries really to single out a single stat that has the best correlation to production. So if you can just explain the concept and what people can take away from it, and also where they can find the data that they need to make a decision come draft day.
Absolutely, yeah. So weighted opportunity is a stat invented by my editor and my mentor, Scott Barrett, like 5 years ago. He let me write about it this year, which was super exciting for me. But basically the idea is, for running backs in fantasy, volume is the most important thing. But it's kind of hard just looking at a running back's game log to get an accurate understanding of how good his volume is, because targets are worth about 3 times more fantasy points on average than a carry when we're outside of the red zone.
In PPR.
In PPR, yes.
Instead of it's like twice or maybe 50% more, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, even in standard, targets significantly more valuable than carries.
It's not even catches, it's targets, which is pretty amazing that it's so much more significant even in standard formats.
Yep, absolutely. And then, of course, kind of intuitively, a touch in the red zone near the end zone is going to be, on average, more valuable in fantasy. Running backs that are getting that goal line work are going to score more fantasy points on average. So we can't count every touch together as if it were the same thing. So what weighted opportunity does is it just assigns that appropriate value to every touch, whether it's a carry, a target, or in or outside of the red zone. And so if you are a crazy person, you could pull up my article and calculate weighted opportunity yourself every single week or before the season or whatever it is you need to do. Or you can find it completely free in the Fantasy Points data suite. We have a free table called the Basic Rushing Table. You can access that just by making a free account at data.fantasypoints.com. And we will just update the weighted opportunity for every single player for you minutes after every game ends. That I highly recommend doing that, especially when we get into the season and you're wanting to get an idea of the type of volume that your players are getting from week to week.
Yeah, there's also an interesting point in the article about positive regression and trying to see which players have the best, I would say, correlation between their weighted opportunities and their actual production. And there's a way for you to try to maybe project what's their performance going to be like next year. And you actually single out like 3 or 4 players that have a relatively high ADP that you're trying to kind of warn us about looking ahead to the next draft. If you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So normally when you compare a player's weighted opportunity to their actual production, if their actual production is lower than their weighted opportunity, as math nerds, analytics people, we would say, okay, this is most likely to regress to what we've projected for their opportunity, right? But it doesn't always work like that, especially with older running backs. If they are vastly underperforming their opportunity, a lot of the time, NFL teams will notice that and they will change their roles. They will scale back the opportunity that they get in the following season. So if you have a running back with really extreme inefficiency in one season, I'm generally scared to draft them the next year. So right now, that includes Josh Jacobs, that includes Tony Pollard, Aaron Jones. People will say, oh, it's like they're going to positively regress, but it almost never works out that way for these extremely inefficient guys.
Yeah. So how would you explain, for example, what happened to players like Josh Jacobs last year, or even Austin Eckler? If we're using both these stats or any other stats you'd like to point out, like how could someone foresee what happened to them last fantasy season?
Sure. It's always hard to,
of course,
to foresee extreme inefficiency.
Yeah.
But I mean, Josh Jacobs was pretty efficient the year before. We expected him to regress to the mean from him performing well above his weighted opportunity. Obviously, the Raiders' offense changed significantly. He had always been pretty game script dependent. Even in his really solid 2022 season, was not nearly as good in games the Raiders lost. It was pretty clear that the Raiders, as projected as not a very good team, more than likely, we're not going to we're not going to support like a bell cow type of role for Josh Jacobs and support the touchdown scoring that he needed. Austin Eckler, I don't know, man. I got fooled by Austin Eckler last year. I would never blame anybody.
I wasn't touching Eckler.
Why? Really? Why not?
I haven't been an Eckler fan throughout his career. I know that he had some crazy seasons in fantasy, but he was drafted as a backup, and Aaron knows I don't touch backups throughout their career. Tony Pollard, and that goes this year as well. I'm all over Tajai Spears in the later rounds, just because I just don't trust Tony Pollard. I believe we'll get into Tajai Spears later, but I think Tajai Spears was drafted as the Derrick Henry, the real Derrick Henry replacement. Yeah, Tony Pollard, they're paying him money. They're paying him more money than Tajai. Tajai's on a rookie contract. But there are just some backups. Alexander Madison, who people were all over last season, he was also drafted as a backup. Pollard, like I said, Eckler was drafted as a backup. And obviously Eckler had some crazy explosive seasons, but I just stay away from that.
Yeah, no, I can kind of agree that I think in the fantasy community, I would not extend this to Austin Eckler, but I will say I think we get very excited about the unknown and what could happen if a backup gets a full workload. But we very often find out that there's a reason that the team had them as their backup. They aren't always going to step up and actually maintain the workload that the starter had, and that we just have to accept that as fantasy managers, that teams aren't always gonna just give 20 touches a game to Alexander Madison when we want them to.
Madison was a big negative surprise for many fantasy owners last year.
קודם כל, תודה רבה שאתם פה איתנו. אני רק רוצה להזכיר לכם שהפרק הקודם שעשינו זה היה עם מרק וילף, בעלים של המינסוטה וייקינגס, אז הלינק יהיה פה למעלה. תיכנסו ללינק ותצפו בפרק, תהנו מזה, תנו לנו לייק גם על הפרק הזה, סאבסקרייב, ותגיבו בתגובות מה אתם חושבים, אם אתם מסכימים איתנו, עם ריאן, וזהו, תודה רבה שאתם איתנו. So thank you so much for being with us. This isn't over, obviously. We're getting into another segment now. Just a reminder to those who are with us that we recorded an episode with Mark Wolf, the owner of the Minnesota Vikings. So please click on the link. The link is below in the description. For that episode. So Ryan, let's get into some fun. Before I get into some fun, quick question: how many fantasy leagues do you play in?
Oh man, I'm in 10 or so dynasty leagues. For redraft, I'll average 5 to 6 per year. I don't really count best ball leagues because there's no management that happens after the draft there, but we'll be drafting probably close to 100 of them this offseason, if not more. So yeah,
solid numbers.
Yeah. A lot of fun.
I know people that will do more than me. It's just a question of
I've done more last year. I've done more last year. I'm embarrassed to admit how many I've done, but we're not going to get into that. I think ever.
Look, draft season is the best season. It's so much fun. It's awesome. Those mock drafts, when you're sitting on the toilet and you just do like 5 mock drafts, you forget why you went into the bathroom. It's just a lot of fun. So we're going to get into 5 running backs. I'm going to ask you if you are drafting these running backs or if you are passing on them. All right? Some of them are sitting very high on ADP, and some of them are a bit lower. All right, so we're going to start off with Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry's ADP is 42 right now on average, round 3. So he's on an offense where Lamar is the running back 1. He's going to get the volume there. Obviously, there's no one else in the running back room. The big risk here for me, obviously, is age. That's the big risk. We were talking about age before. I think there's a lot of opportunity here in the goal line. Lamar isn't outstanding on the goal line. So, Derrick Henry, you taking him or not?
Yeah, I'm kind of lukewarm so on Derrick Henry. Like if I draft 100 teams, I'll probably have him on 8% of them or whatever the like even exactly with the market type of number is. As you said, obviously with Henry, the biggest concern is age. I would say just in terms of upside, he is very likely to get a heavy goal line role on the offense that we just saw support some ridiculous fantasy output from Gus Edwards of all running backs. The Ravens absolutely love to run the ball in the red zone. So if even if Henry is not back to like his total bell cow self like he was before last season, I can see how he gets there just on touchdown efficiency. So I'm open to that, but Henry's not really a particular target of mine.
Yeah, I'm just going to say myself, I think Derrick Henry is kind of like a freak, kind of an Adrian Peterson type freak. So I think age is obviously a factor, but I think he has a chance to be more towards the upside that you mentioned. Because like you said, I think Gus Edwards is like 12 or 13 red zone touchdowns last year, which is insane. I think he has a chance for a similar production. So for whatever that's worth.
Yeah. When it comes to Henry, like I'll probably lean a little bit towards Henry, but you know owners got to be aware that they're playing Russian roulette with Henry. It's going to happen one year, and do you want to be a part of that year? It's coming. Like that year is coming, and you know you got to be aware that you're going to be taking him on a year where he might regress big time.
Yeah.
All right, second running back we have here is Zach Moss, whose ADP is a little bit higher, 112. He's going around round 9. So he did okay with the absence of Jonathan Taylor, which is something positive.
I think he did more than okay. I think.
Yeah,
he did really good.
He had a good season. Yeah, for sure. It's the question here is he a true RB1? I don't know if I buy it. There is a huge opportunity for him. Improved offense, improved O-line for the Bengals. Healthy Joe Burrow.
But you got Chase Brown lurking. You got Chase Brown.
Right, Chase Brown. That's the risk here, I think. Chase Brown, didn't play a lot. He was injured most of last season. When he played, he showed a lot of bright sides. Bengals obviously believe in Zach Moss. They paid him. So what do you think, Zach Moss?
Yeah, I think Zach Moss is a really good scheme fit. I agree. I don't know that he's just going to hold on to the RB1 job for the entire season. I don't know that he has the upside to be a fantasy RB1, but in round 9, I don't really need that. I'm okay in round 9 with this guy can kind of slot into my RB2 position. He's on a really good offense, should have some solid touchdown equity, as Joe Mixon did last year. So yeah, I'm drafting Zach Moss in round 9. Not really a big Chase Brown person. I tend to shy away from this profile where it's the day 3 pick who kind of got some limited run towards the end of the season, was never really carrying like a full bell cow workload though in any particular game. Yeah, some of the rushing efficiency stats look good, but yeah, I mean, ultimately the Bengals went out and signed Zach Moss because they didn't feel comfortable with Chase Brown as their RB1, and I can understand that just in terms of his pass protection and just I don't know that Chase Brown can do all the little things that Zach Moss can do. And look, the Bengals offense is really about airing the ball out with Joe Burrow. That's what they want to do. They don't want their running backs pass protection to get in the way of that. So I think Moss is fine. I think he's going to be on the field a lot this year, and I would call him a value in round 9.
Yeah, definitely a value. That's definitely the right term. Obviously, the questions here are all based on ADP. But Zach Moss for sure shows some bright side. I think ultimately, looking back, if Chase Brown and Zach Moss are both healthy throughout the season, I see a 60-40 split here, 60 towards Zach Moss, obviously. Ron, you have any inputs on Moss?
No, I'm also leaning towards him right now, and I agree with the term value that Ryan mentioned, for sure. Yeah.
All right. So third running back here, is Devin Singletary. Led running backs last year on the Texans. He's taking over Saquon Barkley's position on the Giants. Do not expect Saquon Barkley out of Devin Singletary, but he's taking over that role. There's really no one else in this backfield. Everything is the problem with the Giants is that everything's a downgrade from the Texans. Coach is a downgrade, offense is a downgrade, O-line's a downgrade.
QB.
I am personally leaning towards Devin Singletary. Not a lot. I do have questions. Like I said, the downgrades, But where are you holding on the Singletary?
Yeah, I'm drafting him. I really like this tier of Devon Singletary, Zach Moss, kind of in round 8 and 9, like a lot of these running backs. Look, I will throw out the name Tyrone Tracy. Probably will not amount to anything, but
round 5 draft pick. I don't know how much.
Exactly, but
how much he's breathing down his neck.
Yeah, round 5 draft pick. Was absolutely sick in college. He was a converted wide receiver. He has a role on passing downs. Most likely not, at least to begin the season. But yeah, Singletary is someone that has stepped in on the Texans and even on the Bills for stretches of games in his career where he has like been top 5 in weighted opportunities for certain stretches of his career. So I like Devon Singletary at this ADP. I think he could give, especially in like a best ball format, could give you a lot of really good weeks.
Yeah, the most exciting thing here for me, I think, is that he went untouched. The Giants brought him, and he went untouched in the draft. Like you said, 5th round running back is not going to be too much of a threat. All right, so 4th running back we have here. Okay, this one's very high on the draft boards. Jahmyr Gibbs. Ron is a witness. I was all over him last year. Definitely paid off in some very crucial weeks.
You needed some patience, though. You needed a lot of patience.
So that's the risk here, exactly. So I have so many questions on this guy this year. He's sitting at 12 overall, round 1. I have a lot of questions. Like I said, he had the opportunity to shine last year and absolutely tore it up. Montgomery is the big question for me. Complete piss off last year. Very, very frustrating games where Gibbs is clearly the better talent, and Montgomery is just like a complete pest sitting right next to him and
vulture.
Just not willing to go off the field. I would say draft, but with caution. There could be a very, very annoying situation where it's like last year where Montgomery is just taking the goal line work and he's just hanging out there when Gibbs is the clear better talent.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree. I think 12th overall is a touch rich for Gibbs. I much prefer these other round 1 running backs like Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson. But I can get there with Gibbs just in terms of he didn't catch that many passes last year. Gibbs and Montgomery were kind of used interchangeably where they would just alternate drives, which is fine if that's how the Lions want to use them. I think before the season, we had really envisioned like, okay, Gibbs is going to take 70 to 80% of the passing down work and Montgomery is going to be more the goal line guy. So if you pose it to me that way and say, well, we already know that Gibbs is getting half the goal line work. Will you take a bet that he takes over even more of the passing down work this year? I would have said absolutely yes. So, and I mean, yeah, sure. That's why he is a fringe round 1 pick. I think he's just fine at his ADP. I don't feel any particular way positive or negative about it.
Yeah, for me, it's mostly like how it plays out on my draft. I'm not going to reach for him, but we'll see how things play out. End of round 1, you could stack up a Garrett Wilson and Jahmyr Gibbs. I think that's a fairly good outcome. I do think Gibbs' workload will increase this year, but there's risk. There's a lot of risk there.
The passing game has, Ryan mentioned it, I think the passing game has some upside, especially for Gibbs.
Right. For me, it's also just a bit of trauma from last year taking Gibbs. Yeah. And like I said, I enjoyed Gibbs like crazy. I think people were sleeping on him, but the Montgomery situation was just very, very frustrating.
Yeah.
All right, so last running back here I really like this guy this year, especially at his ADP. I see you already laughing. You know who it is, Ryan. But all right, we're talking here Zamir White from the Raiders. I believe he has the backfield to himself. Like I said, Madison, I don't feel like he's a threat. I think this guy is going to shock a lot of people this year. I love the cheap price at potentially getting an RB1 here. What do you think?
I just worry about the offense, man. So Zamir White in 4 games without Josh Jacobs at the end of the year last year, 15.2 fantasy points per game. That's great. That's easily like a high-end RB2. I get it. But the Raiders went 3-1 in those games. That included like that super weird game that the Chiefs couldn't move the ball for whatever reason. Like they should not have been in a lot of these games. And that
Pierce said they had Mahomes figured out. I think that explains it, right?
Yeah. We'll check back in on that whenever their first game is this year and see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, look, the Raiders projected for a 6.5 win total at all the sports books right now. I just don't think, kind of like what I just said with Jacobs a few minutes ago, I don't see the Raiders supporting a solid RB2 this year. And if White was like a heavy pass catcher, it would be a little bit different if he were a little more game script proof. But just an 8% target share in those 4 games would have ranked only 31st among running backs over the full season. I just don't see the upside in Zamir White. So I'm happy to draft like these Zamir White type of profiles when it's a Zach Moss or a Devin Singletary in round 9. But when I'm paying up and drafting him over running backs, I think have more upside, like a Jonathan Brooks, for example, or wide receivers that I'm actually excited about. I just am not really interested in this type of profile that White offers.
Yeah, I got to go off script for a bit before we get to other positions, because you said some stuff about Chase Brown, what you don't like about like the profile, the later round pick, and never getting the full workload. But you also said that you love Devon Achane like myself. So if you could please explain why you're so high on Devon Achane. And another backfield that I'm intrigued about is the Rams, actually, with Kyren Williams, but with obviously the amazing season he had last year, but given the Blake Corum pick and the injury in the offseason, so how do you see those two backfields playing out next year?
Sure. Yeah, Devon Achane's my favorite player to talk about, so we'll always take that opportunity. So look, Devon Achane. So I really hardcore differentiate between a day 2 pick, so round 2 or 3, versus a day 3 pick, so round 4 or later. That bears out in the historical hit rates. So that's part of why I think of Achane and someone like Chase Brown very, very differently. But also with Achane, I go super into this in my weighted opportunity article, but against his weighted opportunity, he had the most efficient rookie season of any running back of the past decade. All the other guys that are near him on that list saw a big increase in volume the following season. So Alvin Kamara is like the classic example where after his rookie season, everyone was saying, oh my God, he's all of us stupid stat nerds were saying, oh, he's going to regress. He can't keep up this efficiency. And he regressed in his efficiency, but the Saints saw how awesome the guy was and gave him more volume. And I think that is overwhelmingly likely to happen with Devon Achane. He's bulked up this offseason. He can probably handle more of a workload now than before, where he had to stay really slim because he was a track athlete in college. I just see lots of reasons to like Devon Achane this year and see a lot of upside with him. As for Kyren Williams, this one's interesting to me because when you listen to the press conferences from Sean McVay from the Rams coaching staff after the draft, it really sounds like they drafted Blake Corum as like a clone of Kyren Williams. And he was being comped to Kyren Williams by very smart people even before the draft. So stylistically, they're very similar players where they can kind of do everything you want out of a running back at a slightly above average level. And that's what the Rams want. Is they don't want to, like a lot of teams will run a 2-back system where they have more of an early down grinder guy and more of a pass blocking or pass catching running back. The Rams don't like to do that because they think it tips what their offense is going to do on that play. So they like to have a Kyren Williams who can be above replacement level at everything a running back needs to do. So the defense sees him on the field, they don't immediately know if it's a pass or a run. They drafted Blake Corum for the exact same reason, because that's the exact type of player Blake Corum is. So you can interpret that one of two ways. You can say, okay, sounds like Blake Corum is a really big threat to Kyren Williams. Or you can say, okay, the Rams are a franchise that has historically valued running backs a lot higher than especially a lot of NFL teams do right now. Kyren Williams obviously was hurt for 3 or 4 games last year, and the backfield the Rams rolled out when that happened was really ugly. Darrell Henderson came out of retirement. It was not good. I think it's very possible that McVay just looked at that and said, well, we're never doing that again. So we are going to spend a day 2 pick on a Blake Corum, even if he's only going to play a couple drives a game, unless Kyren Williams gets hurt. So I can see it going both ways. I do think McVay is weirdly obsessed with Kyren Williams and really likes him. So Williams is another guy that I would not as much as like Devon Achane, but I would lean into Kyren Williams in round 2 where he's going right now.
Yeah, I love Williams. I love the talent, love the upside. But for me, it's just the fact that they brought in Blake Corum. It kind of takes away the mood from me over there with Williams. I'm leaning towards more that they brought him in to be a committee. I think Corum is also a great talent, which is why I think that. All right, so we're gonna get into. By the way, it's good to have disagreements in fantasy. That's what it's all about. Gotta have those good arguments. Fantasy football. Yeah, but if Zamir White lights it up, you got to come back on our show.
Sounds good, man. I will take that bet. Let's do it.
All right, so we're gonna get into some questions that we had from fans previously. First question here is: what is the ceiling for Malik Neighbors this upcoming season, and how worried should owners be due to the quarterback situation?
I don't think too worried. So yes, I understand the Giants kind of have this stink about them where Daniel Jones immediately got hurt, and we were rolling out some unsavory quarterback names. But I do think Brian Daboll is a creative play caller. I'm not sure. It was mentioned earlier that the Texans to Giants are a downgrading coach. I don't know that it's that clear. I think Brian Daboll is a really good offensive mind. And I just look back to 2022 when Daniel Jones stayed healthy. It wasn't that bad of a passing offense. The Giants were middle of the pack in catchable targets per game that year. And if Neighbors walks in and commands like a 25% target share, we're looking at about 6 catchable targets per game for him. So I'd be cool with that. I think that's fine where he's being drafted right now. I would also expect Neighbors to play out of the slot a lot and to have a lot of opportunity to kind of run after the catch. Daboll is very good at scheming that type of stuff up. And there's just nobody else on this offense that they have any reason whatsoever to design plays for at this point. Yeah. So I'm just expecting a lot of slants, a lot of slot fades and stuff for Neighbors. And
I'm definitely in on Neighbors this year, just because of what you said at the end. There's no one else for him to throw to. I think he's going to just be force fed this year. Daniel Jones has been waiting for this his entire career for a receiver like Neighbors. And also the news coming out of training camp, out of OTAs, is that Neighbors, doesn't really drop passes in 11-on-11s. They seem to really like him. Obviously, I mean, they took him, 5th overall or 6th overall, I don't remember. But a really, really high draft capital they spent on him. And I'm definitely leaning towards Neighbors this season.
Hey, although I'm always taking everything that's coming out of OTAs with a grain of salt, we talked about it. Of course. Remember what they said about Jamar Chase and what we saw in preseason games. He drops everything. He had 4 big drops in the preseason.
But also in a league where also wide receivers is there's committees everywhere. When it comes to wide receivers. Over here, there's no clear wide receiver 2. It's wide receiver 1 and just a major drop off to the next wide receiver. So that's what I like about here. Second question we have here: which second-year running back is the most likely to make a fantasy leap in 2024? Out of Miller from the Saints, Tajay Spears, Chase Brown, or Tank Bigsby?
Yeah, so we kind of talked about a few of these guys already. My answer to this is Tajay Spears. He had a 15% target share when the game was within 1 score last year. That was the 4th best among all running backs. So we get some more competitive games with this new coaching staff in Tennessee. We're not living in the Stone Ages anymore. Just running Derrick Henry a million times. I like it. I'm interested in Spears. And as I said, I don't really believe in Tony Pollard whatsoever. Had the 5th least efficient season against weighted opportunity of the past decade. Those players almost always lose volume the following year. So if I can bet on Tajay Spears as a way to bet against Tony Pollard this year, I'm fine doing that.
Right. I totally agree. I also chose here Tajay Spears out of this list. Currently sitting as the RB28. Tony Pollard was brought in, but like I said before, Iran also knows I don't like backup running backs. And Tony Pollard was a backup running back his entire career. He had opportunity last year. I don't think he proved anything. Spears was drafted in the 3rd round, whereas also Pollard was drafted in the 4th round. And I believe, like I said, Spears was drafted as the real Derrick Henry replacement. Last year, with Derrick Henry on the team, he had 100 attempts and 4.5 yards per carry. Like I said, with Henry there, which is just incredible to me. Now there's, what is it, like 250, I don't know exact number, but something around 250 attempts freed up. And I see an opportunity for a lot of volume here for Tajay Spears, and the value is just amazing. You're getting him in, what is it, the 6th, 7th round. Is it even? I think it's even later actually, but just great value here.
Yep.
All right, we're gonna get to our last question here because me and Aaron gotta get to work and you gotta go to sleep. Let's go with this question: who is the safest 1st round pick in your eye?
Yeah, so I had to think about this one a little bit. I would go with CeeDee Lamb. So kind of to answer the second half of the question first, wide receivers in general, I would call safer in the 1st round. And it's not because of the injury rates. They're not actually that different between the running back and wide receiver position. But the real reason is, especially over the last couple of years, we've just seen a lot more league-winning players at the wide receiver position than we have at the running back position. I dug into this a lot in my 2023 key takeaways article. But yeah, I think just in terms of like a percentage bet, if you want to have a running back or a wide receiver in the 1st round, you should be going wide receiver. CeeDee Lamb himself is still very firmly in the prime of his career. There's unlike a lot of offenses this year, there's no other target competition whatsoever for him. The Cowboys found their best success when they went extremely pass heavy after the bye last year. I don't think that Mike McCarthy has any reason to change that. So yeah, I would back Lamb as the safest 1st round pick, but I'm still taking Christian McCaffrey 101.
Right. Yeah. Jakob, any chance we can squeeze 2 more questions in?
Yeah, go
really
for
quick
it.
Ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it's okay with you, Ryan.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's do the veteran wide receivers under 100 targets last year. We have some names that we got from a viewer called.
I have it here.
Yeah, you have it. So Deontay Johnson, Courtland Sutton, OBJ, Jerry Jeudy. Who are you taking from these names?
Yeah, I'm taking Deontay Johnson very clearly out of this group. Incredibly unlucky last year, had the 11th lowest catchable target rate. Now on the Panthers, we look at this offense and say, or can we really get excited about the Panthers? Adam Thielen averaged over 18 fantasy points per game in the 1st half of the season last year. That was he was a fantasy wide receiver 1 during that stretch. Yeah, he kind of fell off in the 2nd half. That's pretty common for an older wide receiver like Thielen. But Deontay Johnson, much younger, has had a top 20 target share over each of the past 3 seasons. There's an off chance that new head coach Dave Canales can come in and kind of fix Bryce Young, like we saw him do with Geno Smith and with Baker Mayfield the past 2 seasons. So Deontay Johnson has a lot of outs to be really productive this year. And I do just have to shout out Paul Patterson on Twitter at Paul Patterson FF. Recently was collaborating with him on an article, and he is responsible for a lot of those awesome Deontay Johnson stats.
Yeah, cool. I like Johnson here and Jeudy mostly. Sutton, too many questions with the quarterback. OBJ is the clear wide receiver 3, and the age bothers me. I kind of lean towards Jerry Jeudy. I'm not a crazy Jeudy fan at all throughout his career, but for me, I just see a bit of an opportunity on the Browns. Amari Cooper, also on the getting on the wrong side of 30s, and Jerry Jeudy. I see an opportunity for Jeudy just to maybe take away that position from Cooper.
Yeah, so one more questions I had to ask you that we got from a viewer listener and interests me especially is about stacking. For people who don't know, stacking means taking like a quarterback from a specific offense and then taking one of his favorite targets, a wide receiver or a tight end. For example, Mahomes and Travis Kelce, Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb. So what's your take on this strategy in general, and do you have like a favorite stack this year that you think people can aim for?
Yeah, so with stacking, it depends a lot on the format we're talking about. In like a normal kind of like 12-team fantasy redraft league, probably not that important. You don't really need to think about it that much. If you're playing like a best ball league or like daily fantasy where it's just 1 week, you absolutely should be stacking. The math all backs it up. Yeah, I would just say the important thing with stacking is you don't want to reach to create your stack. So just because you drafted Patrick Mahomes doesn't mean you should be reaching multiple rounds to get Travis Kelce. But aside from that, yeah, I'm pro stacking in general. It raises the weekly ceiling of your fantasy team. And I'm all about raising the ceiling of my fantasy team. So
yeah. You don't have like a risk management issue, doubling down on a certain offense. And then if everything comes crumbling down, you're basically doomed. Like imagine last year taking, I don't know, Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley, or even Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Obviously a lot of stuff happened there. But in terms of risk management, you don't have like a specific objection about that strategy. In redraft, I'm talking redraft here.
Yeah, and I mean, not really. And the reason for that is even in like a typical 10 or 12 team redraft league, you only have a less than 10% chance of winning your league. My objective is always win the league. It's not make the playoffs. It's not I'm in the top half. It's win the league. So
I like that.
The way to do that is to raise your ceiling as much as possible. I don't really care if I'm exposing myself to more downside by doing that, because there's already a lot of downside in a fantasy league, and that's 90% of the teams are not going to win it.
Yeah.
Right, I totally agree. So Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed.
Yeah.
Keep up the amazing work on fantasy points, and just enjoy fantasy. It's the best thing out there.
And again, if you're not following Ryan, if you're not following Fantasy Points as an avid follower, I really recommend, if you're listening, go ahead and do it. I'm sure you've got more exciting stuff coming up during this off season and obviously during the season. So thanks a lot from me.
Thank you for your time, my man.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
All right. So just for our listeners, thank you so much for listening to this episode. בעברית, תודה רבה שהקשבתם לפרק. אנחנו באים אליכם עם עוד הרבה תוכן על פנטזי בחודשים הקרובים, אז תישארו מעודכנים, ותודה רבה.
תודה.